Like all good stories, there has to be a beginning. But before a reader commits, it has to be more than the plot, more than the characters. If you want to connect with your audience, you have to give something of yourself. Yes, you can churn out story after story hiding behind a veil, but in these modern literary times, that is no longer enough. With that in mind, 1984 was a strange year for me. A year of firsts. Here's why. I just finished my first year at catering college. Looking back now, I know I'd chosen the wrong direction. Though, to be honest, I suspect any direction would have felt wrong in hindsight. That realization came later. I was in my late teens. That unsettled space where you're no longer a boy, but you don't yet know what kind of man you're becoming. Politically, the landscape felt alien. As if the world was holding its breath, yet bracing itself for impact at the same time. The Cold War was still very much alive. Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, two visionaries who wielded power very differently, one with sharp wit, the other with an iron fist, and a handbag as a shield. Power was the currency. Fear of the unknown sat just beneath the surface. The UK was still living in the long shadow of the miners' strike. The USA had just embarked on the Star Wars program. And George Orwell's 1984 stopped being a book title and became a reference point for surveillance, for control, for who was really watching. Globally, one thing stood out. And to this day, I still remember it clearly. 23rd October 1984. A rare moment when the BBC did something close to actual reporting. The Ethiopian famine entered Western consciousness. Not through statistics, not through summaries. There was a graphic content warning, and for once it meant something. 6 minutes. That's all it took. Raw, painful, almost unbearable to watch. But for one poor Irishman, it sparked something else. It wasn't just the story, it was the power of making it personal. And from that came one of the greatest charity concerts the world had ever seen. Band-Aid wasn't just a song, it was a moment. Technology was shifting too. The first personal computers were arriving. A new era was beginning, quietly but unmistakably. Entertainment changed as well. Special effects, scale, spectacle. Cinema was learning how to dream bigger. Star Wars, Alien, Close Encounters, E.T. Tron, Star Trek. On and on. They were good. Some of them were great, but for me, there was one film I was waiting for. A story I'd lived with for years. One I'd played over and over in my head. It fueled my boyhood imagination. Shaped how I saw life, even though I didn't fully understand it yet. But it resonated, and when I heard the news that it was finally coming to the big screen, this wasn't just a film, this was my Dune, my Arrakis, my Spice. From that film, I learned something I carried into later life. That you could take something and make it your own. Imprint your vision on it, and still tell the same story. Different interpretations, different viewpoints, all of them valid. I didn't care whether it was perfect. I didn't care whether it followed the book word for word. What mattered was this. Someone had the audacity, the nerve, the vision to try. To attempt Frank Herbert's work at all. Only later did I learn the film should have been almost 4 hours long, by some accounts even longer. I would have sat through every minute of it. When I walked out of that cinema that December afternoon, my brain had been rewired. The film and the book taught me something I'd never understood before. That the weight of a story doesn't live in the pages, it lives in the author. As long as you understand where they were coming from, what they were trying to say, the story itself becomes an interpretation of their beliefs. David Lynch understood that, and so did Denis Villeneuve. A script can be personal, it can diverge, it can add things that were never on the page, as long as the writer's ideas, the storyteller's intent, still resonate. For years after that, I felt the story had more to tell. I just couldn't put my finger on it. Then, while I was working as a chef in Tewksbury, a fellow chef and a fellow Dune fan handed me the Dune Encyclopedia. To me, it felt like the Holy Grail. And slowly, without realizing it, I began doing something else. I began thinking about the gaps. Not gaps in the storyline, but in the author's thumbprint. The DNA of the work itself. To most people, it was something to gloss over or discuss at length. To me, it pointed somewhere else. It said, now what? Or, as Simon Sinek would later describe it, the why. Not a question, a principle. The engine, the motive, the gravity behind the action, the person behind the pen, not just the story on the page. The story itself, I knew back to front. It held an entire hidden world, one I could explore, even fill, and still keep intact. The gaps, though, those I knew nothing about. They opened up space to imagine, to dream. And the more I thought about them, the deeper those gaps became. Then, in late autumn, November 1989, I was invited to my sister's wedding in Germany. We arrived late the night before the ceremony, and were staying in the Black Forest, in a chalet overlooking the mountains and lakes. The altitude was thin enough that my mother went to bed early. My sister and I stayed out on the balcony, playing a game of chess and losing miserably. Yes, just a battle of wits a radio. And the setting sun. It was the kind of place you go to if you wanted to escape your life. And as we played, the radio was on in the background, keeping us company. Loud enough to listen to, but not loud enough to drown out cowbells in the distance, or the high-pitched screech of a golden eagle overhead. My German wasn't brilliant. I tried to keep my focus on the game, keeping the bird of prey in my sights, though I'm fairly sure it had a better view of my chessboard than I did. Then suddenly my sister stood up and turned the radio up. The Berlin Wall was falling. I can only compare the feeling to moments like 9/11 or the assassination of JFK. Those rare points in time when the world seems to stop. Even with my limited understanding, I knew something enormous was happening. It was magical. That's the only word for it. Hopeful, apprehensive, dreamlike. Remember, this was before the internet, before social media, before instant global reaction. Yet somehow news traveled faster than silence. By the time we went to bed, close to midnight, the entire conversation was about the wall. She was getting married the next morning. Relatives were arriving, and still, everything came back to Berlin. After the wedding, we went back to the chalet. I sat alone overlooking the Black Forest. But this time, something shifted. Not a thought, an understanding. The closest I can come to explaining it is that a pattern began to emerge. Not a shape, not an answer. More like realizing not the solution to an equation, but how the equation itself works. All those years of thinking about Dune, about Herbert, about structure, and gaps, and what happens in between. So I took out my notebook. To this day, I have no idea what I wrote, only that I did. I didn't start at the beginning. That much I knew for certain. I started with a man who had stepped away, someone I could understand easily. I asked myself, what would it be like to retire after a violent, chaotic life? What kind of person chooses isolation? What kind of past demands that kind of quiet? Where would he be? What would the evenings hold? The sounds, the light, the sunset? Just notes, not a story. Years later, that person would become Prescott, a retired MI5 operative, sitting alone, taking in the evening. So over the next 30 years, I built it, rethought it, took it apart, and rebuilt it again. I jotted down notes, pinned them to walls, cross-referenced timelines. When I bought my first laptop, I used Word and spreadsheets, always driven by imagination. At the time, I had no idea I was world-building. I wasn't trained to write. Dyslexia was my greatest drawback and my greatest asset. I could hold a scene down to the fiber of a button, Smell of rain as tires tore through wet streets, images racing across my mental storyboard. Where words failed, my imagination took over. By the time COVID hit, I was carrying 4 books in my head, from beginning to end. Over 600,000 words crammed into one side of my brain. The right, or maybe the left. So there you are. A little more about me. A bit more meat on the bones. I know this won't interest everyone. But if I don't write it down, how would anyone know that you don't need a BA with honors in English literature or to come from a family of writers to tell a story worth telling? If life has taught me anything, or if Frank Herbert has, it's that imagination doesn't have rules. Not all questions need answers, and failure is just as important as getting it right. Because in the end, it's not about income, it's not about fame, it's about telling your story through your life. So to all you budding writers who want to make a living, go for it. Write, publish, fill your boots, bask in whatever fame or fortune comes your way. But if you're holding back because you think your story is too big, too complicated, or that it will only ever be you revisiting it again and again, here's my view. It's not about them, it's about you. That's what readers are investing in. Stories are a dime a dozen, but you only come around once. So that's a little more insight into me as I travel down this literary path, carrying my life's baggage with me. If I've given you pause for thought, or inspired you even a little and shown you that you don't need to be a writer to write, just write. And if people connect, that's a bonus. If you feel like helping, a funding round will be coming soon, and any support will be appreciated, even a like or a simple acknowledgement. So, Merry Christmas, and may the new year be your year